All right, we're about to dive in and try to decode one of the Bible's most symbolic and, let's be honest, mysterious chapters, Revelation 12. According to one major interpretation, the wild symbols in these verses, a woman, a child, and a great red dragon, are actually the key to understanding a conflict that spans all of human history. So, the interpretation we're exploring today sees this chapter as this massive cosmic drama. It's filled with this vivid, almost psychedelic imagery that isn't just about some far-off future. Instead, this view says it's a summary of a conflict that began way back in Genesis and is, believe it or not, still going on today. To really get a handle on this viewpoint, we're going to walk through it in 5 key parts. We'll start by decoding the symbols themselves, then we'll identify the main characters, trace their conflict all the way through history, and then uncover what this interpretation calls the missing link in the whole story, which all leads up to the dragon's ultimate endgame. Okay, so the first big idea to wrap your head around is that this chapter isn't just about the future. This interpretation argues it's kind of like a Rosetta Stone for the entire biblical story, revealing a central conflict that stretches from the very first book to the very last. So, who are the main players in this cosmic drama? Well, according to this view, everything, and I mean everything, hinges on correctly identifying 3 main figures right from the opening verses: the woman, the man-child, and that great red dragon. First up, the woman. This interpretation argues she represents the nation of Israel. And the biggest clue? That crown of 12 stars. This is seen as a direct callback to Joseph's dream back in Genesis, where the sun, moon, and stars represented Jacob, his wife, and the 12 tribes. It's a clear link. Next, we have the man-child. He's identified as Jesus Christ, and it's because of one very specific phrase. He is destined to rule all nations with a rod of iron. Now, that exact wording pops up in other messianic prophecies, like Psalm 2, which is all about God's anointed son. And finally, the dragon. Now, for this one, you don't even have to guess. The text leaves absolutely no room for doubt. Later in the chapter, verse 9 comes right out and says the dragon is that old serpent called the devil and Satan. The symbol is identified for us right there in the passage. Okay, this is where it gets really crucial for the interpretation. While some people see the woman as the church, this view argues that's a major contradiction. Why? Because the church is called the bride of Christ, not his mother. So for this entire narrative to make sense, the woman has to be Israel, the nation that physically gave birth to the Messiah. So now that we have our characters identified, the narrative just explodes. This conflict isn't about one single moment in time. This interpretation sees it as one long, continuous war, with Revelation 12 being just one critical chapter in a much, much larger story. So this view lays out a pretty chilling pattern of attacks against what's called the messianic line, the lineage leading directly to Jesus. It argues that Satan's strategy has always been to try and prevent the Messiah from ever arriving. From Cain murdering Abel to Pharaoh's decree against the Hebrew baby boys to Herod's massacre in Bethlehem, each one is seen as a calculated attempt to cut the story short before the man-child could even be born. So what's the so-called missing link to understanding this whole thing? Well, this interpretation argues it's the specific, ongoing, and future role of the nation of Israel. It's presented as the one piece of the puzzle that makes all the other parts just click into place. Yeah, this viewpoint, sometimes called Israelology, basically argues that you can't fully understand the Bible without a really clear focus on God's specific promises to the nation of Israel. The argument is that a lot of theological systems out there are just incomplete because they overlook this absolutely central piece. And this leads to a direct and strong rejection of a concept known as replacement theology, which is pretty much what it sounds like, the idea that the Christian church has completely replaced Israel in God's plan. The interpretation we're explaining here frames this not just as a simple misreading, but as a seriously flawed doctrine with huge consequences. The case against replacement theology is built on several key points. It all starts with the idea that God's promises to Israel were unconditional, meaning they can't be broken. So to suggest Israel has been replaced is, in this view, to basically question God's faithfulness and character. And that has massive implications for how you interpret prophecy. This viewpoint even goes so far as to connect this theological stance to a dark history of anti-Semitism. But this all raises a really big question. If the dragon was fundamentally defeated at the cross, why does the war keep going? This interpretation offers a very specific and surprisingly logical reason for the dragon's final moves. Right? Why keep fighting a war you've already lost? The answer proposed here isn't just about simple rage or mindless revenge. It suggests a calculated, strategic motive for Satan's continued fight, even after his ultimate defeat was already locked in. So here's the logic this interpretation presents, step by step. 1. For the second coming to happen, a precondition must be met. The nation of Israel has to repent and ask for the Messiah to return. 2. The dragon's entire endgame, his strategic goal, is to prevent that from ever happening. 3. The method? Attack and destroy the believing remnant of Israel, so there's no one left to fulfill that role. It's a desperate gambit to prevent the end of the story. And that, in this view, is why the dragon's final attack isn't random. It is laser-focused on what the text calls the remnant of her seed, the believing Jews who hold the testimony of Jesus. They are seen as the final obstacle to the dragon's plan, and, at the same time, the very key that will trigger the final act of history. So in the end, this entire interpretation transforms these ancient, mysterious symbols into a lens for our times. It frames all of human history not as a series of random, chaotic events, but as a single, ongoing cosmic conflict with a clear beginning, middle, and end. It really begs the question, what does it mean to view the world and the events happening today through a lens like that?